Hey, everybody, and welcome to season 2, episode 9 of Your Spiritual Best Friend. I am your host, Josh Sanchez. And when it comes to today's podcast episode, it's going to be a fun one where we're going to talk about some abandonment and we're also going to do weekly tarot and stuff like that. So, if you guys, one thing I really want you guys to really think about while hearing a little bit of my story and also, as we go through some of these examples, just like, like if you are displaying any of these symptoms too, like part of this podcast is to help raise awareness for things that we might not be aware of. Like there could be certain things where we don't know how to describe it. And we tune into a podcast and it's like, oh, that's how I can describe it. So if anything is resonating with you, don't be a stranger because like we learn through our experiences. So I just wanted to start the podcast with that. So our rundown, we're going to talk a lot about abandonment. We're going to talk about where it stems from. We're going to talk about some theories that are associated with abandonment. I'm also going to share a little bit of my own personal experience with it, and then we'll wrap up. We'll take a little break and then we'll wrap up with some weekly tarot for you guys, just some things for you guys to think about for the next upcoming week. So like always, guys, before we get started, please like, rate, and comment and share the podcast. Your ratings will really help boost this podcast overall as I tell my stories. And it's really good to just get the name out there, because this podcast has been running for, man, I would probably say, 2 years now. So it's really crazy how fast time has flown. But let's get started right away. We're going to get into our abandonment conversation. So when it comes to abandonment, first I want you guys to understand, so there is not a diagnosis for abandonment. So I just want to start with that right away. There is no diagnosis for it. So it's mainly the fear of abandonment. It's not a clinical diagnosis, but it usually is a form of anxiety. And in other clinical disorders, you see this fear of abandonment being one of the main components of the other disorder, right? So we got codependency, right? Insecurities, maladaptive views on power, competence, and intimacy, right? And it makes interpersonal relationships very difficult to sustain because we do not feel fulfilled, right? So, fear of abandonment, according to positivepsychology.com, so you got to have your sources. It's not a clinical diagnosis. It is a form of anxiety and a symptom of several clinical disorders, including both mood and personality disorders. Individuals who experience abandonment are also more likely to have long-term mental health issues, right? So, in one of our podcasts that we talked about, like supporting someone that is currently going through it or might be experience things, right? One of the key points that was brought up in that podcast was, treating mental illness like a physical one. Like if you're physically sick, you're going to go to the doctor to get better. Like if you are mentally going through it, seek professional help, right? And support people that are going through it, right? So this fear of abandonment can be shown in a lot of different mood and personality disorders. So if you guys do not know, mood disorders, think of like your emotions, right? So 1 second you might be feeling happy, 1 second you might be feeling upset. Like there's just no mood regulation. So that is a mood disorder. A mood disorder is involving your emotions, your overall mood, and being able to regulate those emotions because it can be hard depending on what we experience. A personality disorder is completely different. Personality disorders, it's more of like an identity. Like this is how my brain is wired, and this is the type of person I am. So a fear of abandonment could be a core belief or a core issue that the person is experiencing, and it's manifesting into mood disorders and personality disorders. So I just wanted to clarify that before we really get into it. So, the anxiety component of fear of abandonment, right? Anxiety is the foundational component of abandonment fear. Individuals who struggle with generalized anxiety disorder or GAD or other anxiety disorders are more likely to experience the fear of abandonment in close relationships. you know? Because again, like the fear of abandonment, right, is being like the fear of like, oh, I'm all alone, right? Like this person's leaving me, right? And with that, we can have a lot of catastrophizing thoughts, or like we can think that immediately some like the worst thing is happening, right? And that's anxiety inducing, because anxiety is based off of fear and worry, right? We all have things that make us uncomfortable, that make us worry, that bring up some fears. And one of the things is with the fear of abandonment, that is the big thing, you know? So anxiety is a very big component because it shows up as distorted thinking patterns, right? You're making irrational assumptions, right? You're catastrophizing. So it's like all of these things, like you're having racing thoughts that are going through your head. And that's all anxiety when it comes to the fear of abandonment. The next part component of the fear of abandonment is depression, also known as, again, major depressive disorder, so MDD. Depression involves feeling sad, a loss of interest in pleasurable activities, changes in sleep, weight, loss of energy, feeling worthless or guilty. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later as I share my own personal examples. You might have a difficulty with concentrating or making decisions, right? And individuals with depression, it could be a couple of things, right? They might push people away and question if they're loved or even worthy of the love, or even like a fear of rejection, right? So this fear of abandonment, right? Like being like left out, and like when you've been neglected, right? Like depression usually pops up, and it shows in many different ways, so it's like, for instance, like you want to talk to people, you want to meet new people, but there could be just this big fear of rejection that is holding you back from wanting to reach out and put yourself out there, right? So that's one way how it can show and it can manifest. We'll do a couple more, and then we'll get into a little bit more of just some signs to look at for the fear of abandonment. So the last two I'm going to talk about is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So it could be through a traumatic event where you've experienced such intense feelings of neglect that you might either feel emotionally numb to it and cut others off, or it might manifest in disturbing memories, dreams, stuff like that. So those are some things for you guys just to think about. And the last one is borderline personality disorder, or BPD. And borderline personality disorder, this is a mental health condition that includes difficulty managing emotions, instability, and difficulty with maintaining relationships. One sign of defining symptoms of BPD is codependency and a fear of abandonment. Individuals with BPD will often turn to self-harm or other destructive behaviors to deal with the unstable moods. It's like, again, the extremes of the all or nothing. You either have all of me or none of me. And yes, so those are just some things, like that's how abandonment, although not being clinically diagnosed, that's how abandonment can be seen and shown through anxiety and mood and personality disorders. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the 7 signs of fear of abandonment, right? So these are just some things for you guys to look at. So usually a fear of abandonment, one of the common themes is there's often a lot of neglect, right? So you can detect this very young in children by just looking at these couple points. So signs of abandonment issues in children, right? They might act clingy or experiencing emotional dysregulation when left alone. So they're left alone and they're immediately unable to calm themselves down. Like they might pace, they might start to have racing thoughts, right? The next one, they might have excessively worry or panic about losing someone close. So they might consistently like repeat, like, oh, like I don't want to lose this person. I don't want to lose this. I don't want to lose that, right? They have a big fear of being alone, so they always need to be around a person. And they also tend to get sick more often due to stress. Because think about it. If you're experiencing a fear of abandonment, right, you're constantly and consistently having those thoughts of, I don't want to be alone. I don't I don't want to lose somebody close, like, and when you're consistently thinking that, like, you are stressing yourself out constantly because of that fear. When we live in fear, it's so draining for our mental health. That's why one of the big needs in Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the need for safety, right? If we don't feel safe, then we're not going to be able to process anything, because in our mind, all we're focusing on is, what do I need to feel safe? And when it comes to having a fear of abandonment, like, that is something that is very consistent. It's the excessive worry of, am I going to be alone? Is this person leaving? Right? Like, it's a lot, right? Now, this is how a fear of abandonment can be shown in adults. So, one example, pushing people away. This presents as withdrawal, exhibiting trust issues, and the inability to be open and honest with loved ones. So these are your people that, when you are going through something that's very intense, they will push you away. Like, the people that are like, hey, I'm willing to check in. Do you need anything? They are going to push you away. That's just one way of how abandonment shows, because when they were younger, they might have felt those feelings, right? And they tried to go to somebody, but that person was not there, right? So now we learn to, okay, I'm gonna handle it on my own. I'm gonna push people away, right? So that's one way how fear of abandonment can show. The second way is by codependency. So codependency is when individuals rely on other people to meet all of their emotional needs. People who become overly needy and possessive in relationships are often codependent. So this is the opposite of pushing people away. You want this person with you 24/7. You might want to call them consistently. You want to be around them all the time. And that's where, and again, like, we all want to be with our partners. It's natural to do that. However, if we are feeling that urge to stay with them 24/7, then that's something we got to be honest with ourselves, because part of a healthy relationship is being able to be your own person outside of it. And the last way the fear of abandonment can be shown in adults is through anger. Think about it. Anger is usually a second emotion, right? But it's also one of the emotions that people tend to respond quickly to. When someone is angry, most likely we're going to have to respond right away because they are angry, right? Or that might be the only emotion we were taught in, like, growing up, that, okay, like, when I was sad, people didn't really hear me. But when I'm angry, that's when people really hear me and understand me. So that's something when it comes to anger, like, that's the reason why anger is going to be very common in a lot of these topics we're going to talk about, because that is the emotion that typically gets heard the fastest, right? And we want to get what we want the quickest, right? It's just natural human tendency. So people with abandonment issues might allow others to get close to them, but then become aggressive, reactive, or violate if they feel threatened or upset. So it's like that extreme. It's like, all right, like, I let you in. I don't trust people a lot. You are in my life. And the second things become a problem, or we might feel like we're getting too close, now we're going to start being more aggressive and angry towards them. But some long-term effects of abandonment can lead to general anger, mood swings, and a lack of confidence. Fear of abandonment is primarily characterized by the inability to establish and maintain healthy relationships, right? So, right, here's just some ways in which, how this fear of abandonment. Now, we talked about how it's shown in adults, but now involving the relationships, here's just some things. So according to Fraley, in 2002, he created a study focusing on abandonment. And it's based off of attachment theory. And I did a podcast on attachment theory, but there's pretty much three types of attachment. There is avoidant attachment, where we avoid and we do not want to get emotionally close. There is the anxious attachment, where it's the opposite of avoidant, where we constantly and consistently seek and need that validation, right? And then there's the anxious avoidant, where it's like 1 second you're avoidant and you don't want to engage in any closeness. And then you have the anxiety part of it where you want the excessive. So it's like the extremes of this and that. And do I want to open up emotionally? Do I not want to open up emotionally? Right. So that's what attachment theory is. And this is what the fear of abandonment is based off of. So here are some things to look at in your relationships. And it's something for you guys just to think about. So the first one is people pleasing, or one partner always gives too much or reaching out. So if you're in a relationship where either you are the person that is consistently reaching out, you're the one that is consistently, putting in the effort, and your partner's not reciprocating that, that is a fear of abandonment. That's how it's shown. Because part of abandonment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my story once I'm done this, is when you get in relationships, like if you are consistently focusing on your partner and you're accommodating things for your partner, you're losing the most important component, which is yourself. And because again, it goes back to like, we're not worthy of getting this love. So it's like, man, like I really want to give as much as I can, and you don't realize that. So that's the first one. The second one, envy or jealousy of other people's relationships. So you might consistently try and compare your relationship with your friend's relationship, right? So that's something to keep an eye on. Another example, inability to trust another person, right? So I can't fully commit. I can't fully trust this person, right? The next one we have consistent feeling of insecurity in the relationship. So it's like these insecurities continue to consume and control your mind. And it doesn't matter what your partner says or does. It's just something that now your partner has a role in making sure that they are not making your insecurities worse. Like, don't get me wrong on that one. But with every relationship, a part of it is ourselves, though. We need to be able to be aware of, okay, like, is this an insecurity, right? And fear of abandonment, that's what it brings up. And the last two we have needing to control all decisions and aspects of the relationship. So feeling like you need to be in control of everything. And the inability to provide or accept physical or emotional intimacy. So you might physically withhold affection from your partner, and even emotionally as well. You might avoid certain topics with them because of that fear, right? So, what are some things that cause abandonment issues, right? So, that's the real thing, right? So, I mentioned earlier in the podcast about how there's emotional abuse or neglect, right? And it usually stems from childhood. I know for me, that was definitely something that check right away, especially when I was younger. I'm a lot better now, but yeah, like my younger days, like there was a lot of neglect there, and and that's something that plays a big role when it comes to abandonment. So there's physical and emotional abuse or neglect, any trauma experienced because of the abandonment, feeling rejected by caregivers, the death of a parent or a primary caregiver, being emotionally or physically abandoned by a friend or a loved one, right? So it's usually something along those lines that causes us to feel this way. It does not just have to be parents, because I'm not gonna bash all parents, because there's some parents that they do the right thing. They're there for their child. They're putting their child in the best position to succeed. And all it takes for them is to meet somebody either at school or at work, right? And they pour all of their love to them, and things don't work out, right? So it could be anything like that, right? We might be emotionally or physically abandoned by someone close to us, and then now that's triggering it, right? Like now we have that fear. But usually a fear of abandonment usually begins in childhood from adversive childhood experiences, or called ACEs. So that is a term that's often used in the mental health field a lot. Okay, as a child experience an ACE, right? Because this is different. There's like different types of it, right? There's abuse, neglect, traumatic loss, right? Like that's what an ACE is. So it's a adverse childhood experience. So that way you guys know some terminology. But Yes, so those are some things for you guys just to look at when it comes to abandonment, because again, like it's again, like it's very normal, right? Like I want to normalize this stuff, right? Because in our relationships, like the more we become aware of what's going on in our attachment styles and this fear of abandonment, the more, we can grow and heal ourselves. So before we take a break on this podcast, because I can't believe it, we're already at 20 minutes, I wanted to just share a little bit of my own personal stories when it comes to my own fears of abandonment, because I definitely do have it. Like I will be honest with you. Like I I've gotten a lot better with accepting parts of myself. But I will say, like, I learned a lot through my relationships, just how much like that abandonment consumed me in my own personal relationships. So I would say for me, like when I was younger, me and my siblings, we definitely all have something similar where my mom, she tries her best. We love my mom, but there is times where she needed to focus on herself and heal her own self. And during that time period, there was a lot of neglect going on in the house. Like my grandmother, she did the best that she could to take care of us and give us direction. On my last podcast, I shared some really powerful stories I learned from her. But yeah, like when you experience a lack of caretaking from the people that brought you into the world, there's going to be some fears there. And I think for me, what really consumed me in my relationships, at times I would blame myself for things that were going wrong in the relationship. And I'm talking about things that I wasn't in the wrong. Like I had a valid reason, I had a valid understanding of how I felt, but like in my head, I was so focused on keeping the relationship, keeping trying to make my relationships in the past last, that I was losing myself. And that's something when again, like when you experience abandonment issues, like you don't realize until you take a step back and really think about it. Like I was really losing parts of myself because again, like I was trying to do whatever it took to keep the relationship going, that I myself was sacrificing and not trusting myself. There was that voice that was saying to me, you need to let go, you need to move on, right? Like there's plenty of people out there. There's people that will give you the love that you deserve. But in my head, I was not, in my head, I was just like, I'm not worthy of that. And I think that was something that I went to therapy. I really had to reflect and be honest with myself because, yeah, like it's tough to realize. Like we all try to avoid things, right? Like we have defense mechanisms. Avoidance is something that's very common. And there was a part of me, especially in my last relationship, where I was feeling that way for a couple months, and I suppressed that part of myself. I wanted to make things work. I wanted to do whatever it took. But that's the thing when it comes to abandonment is, like you cannot lose yourself. And that's one of the toughest things that I had to learn in my relationships is again, like I had to turn that off. I had to turn off that voice where it's like, man, like you need to save, you need to go, you got to make this work, you got to move in, like you got to be that ideal partner. But as long as I am myself, like that is what truly matters, right? Like if I'm not myself, then my partner does not know who the real me is, and that was something where I've learned a lot in my relationships, not just romantically, but also in my friendships too. Like there was times where I would just be so in my head, just like I am not worthy of this relationship, because again, like I was so used to just people coming in my life when I was younger coming and going. Like there was just not a lot of consistency. So it's like I would get close and then they would leave. And then it's just a constant up and down. And it was just like, I can't handle it. It's too much for me to handle. So I would say that's one way how my own fear of abandonment showed in my relationships. Like I was very self-sacrificing of parts of myself to maintain a relationship. But I would also say too, on the contrary, like I definitely avoided a lot of intense conversations. Like there was times where, especially when I was younger, like I would have this fear of making eye contact with let's say like I messed up in the situation, or like if I felt like it was time to move on, like I would have this fear of like just like trying to describe it. Like I would have this fear of, oh man, like this person is just gonna leave me forever. Like, oh, this person is, like, and sometimes like that's what relationships are meant to do. But I was just so just in my head about, oh man, like I'm not a good person, like it shouldn't have gotten to this point. And again, like that's where that abandonment comes in. It's like it's disorganized attachment, right? Like it's again, like you are losing and you're not trusting yourself. And that's one of the most important things in any relationship is, like if you feel like it's no longer serving you, okay, listen to that voice. There's something telling you that this is not working anymore, right? You're not being fulfilled the way that you need to be fulfilled. And it's not a disrespect to the relationship. Sometimes you meet somebody, at first things are great, and then eventually over time, like you guys go your separate ways. It's all part of life. Like you live and you learn. And when it comes to me, like that was something personally when it comes to abandonment that I really struggled with. I struggled with trusting myself and listening to myself because I was so focused on I don't want to lose this relationship. And by me explaining my examples and my stories, like I want you guys to, just think for yourselves, have you guys felt this way before? Because we've all been there, whether that's with a friend, whether that's with family, whether that is with, it doesn't have to be just romantically, but like even your romantic relationships, like that fear of abandonment, especially if you've experienced it, it comes all full circle. So I wanted to share that. I wanted to share my own little story. Before we wrap up this first topic, we'll take a little break and we'll get into my weekly my weekly tarot reading for you guys. There's 5 treatment options for fear of abandonment. And I actually did a couple of these, my own personal examples, and I've had some really good insight. So the first one is attachment-based therapy. This is a supportive client therapist bond. So that's what the main thing is. Like the therapist's job is to make you feel comfortable, right? So that's one treatment option. And you focus a lot on the attachment theory, the 3 things that I mentioned earlier in this podcast. The second one is behavioral therapy, right? Because usually there is it's called ABC. So there's and there's an antecedent. I can never pronounce that word right. Then there's a behavior and then there's a consequence, right? So that's what behavioral therapy focuses on. Is there something in your environment that is triggering you to this fear of abandonment, right? The third option, you have cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. This is where, again, this focuses on those unhealthy thinking patterns. I don't like to say the word unhealthy because it stems from something, but that's what it talks about. Okay, like when you feel this, what do you think? What's going on, right? The fourth one is psychodynamic therapy. And this one is involving, there's like the empty chair technique where you talk to yourself in the empty chair. There's so many different forms of treatment. I'm just giving a little summary of everything. And the last one is psychoeducation. So what we're doing on this podcast, right? We're talking about it, right? We are going from there. So, and I'll put some worksheets in the show descriptions if you guys would like to learn a little bit more. But that's our little segment on abandonment. right? So we talked about abandonment, we talked about attachment styles. Again, we talked about attachment theory. So had a lot of wonderful conversations, and also shared a little bit about my own experience as well. But we're going to take a quick break on this podcast. We're going to come back and we're going to get into my weekly tarot reading. So you guys are listening to Your Spiritual Best Friend with Josh Sanchez. We will be right back. All right, and we are back. Thank you guys. I need to take a little break just to get my cards and stuff in order. All right, so to wrap up this podcast, we're going to do our weekly tarot card reading. So my question for everybody is very simple. What energy should me and my podcast listeners expect for this upcoming week? I will pull 3 cards and we will go from there. All right, let's see. There's 3 cards. Perfect. All right, so, okay. All right. All right, so the first card we got, let's see here. I'm going to mix this up. All right, so the first card we got is the Hierophant. So this is the 5th card in the Major Arcana. And what this card is going to say is spiritual wisdom, tradition, conformity, ethics. The Hierophant represents the necessity to follow existing conventions, rules, or well-established procedures. This card advises you to maintain conventional boundaries that are considered a standard method. Rather than being inventive and breaking norms, you will be familiarized with certain traditions, beliefs, and systems, which have been existing for quite a long time. This tarot card, can also be a sign that you need to bring back family customs that are being neglected, instead of innovation and breaking the old ways. Do you feel that you are lacking rituals and traditions? Getting lost with your structured beliefs? Build a regular practice or habit, such as everyday prayer or expressing gratitude before a meal. Consider discovering your spiritual or religious heritage. Surround yourself with people that help you go back to what you've been taught. So I would say with this card, this is going back to your roots. So this is getting connected and centered back to you, right? So if you're a spiritual person, getting back to the spiritual things that bring you fulfillment, right? And that's going to look different for everybody. So for some people, you guys might pray more. You might want to go to church, right? For others that are not into the church and stuff, it could be just getting into like a spiritual practice that you've always liked, right? So that's the first card in the reading. The second card we got the 10 of Swords. As you guys see, there's 10 swords. This person is laying on the ground and there is blood on the ground. So this one is very intense. So the 10 of Swords, here's what we got. Mental breakdown, betrayal, enemies. The 10 of Swords could be an indication that someone close to you isn't what they seem. A close friend or family member may be bad-mouthing you and will jump at the first chance to stab you in the back. Although there is not much you can do to prevent this, you can prepare for the worst. Examine your close relationships. Now may be the time to eliminate some dead weight before these relationships get the best of you. In a mental sense, this card can also foretell a breakdown, an inability to cope with life circumstances. Although these aren't positive implications, excessive worry isn't the answer. The situation that is impending will only be temporary. And you have the strength you need to be able to weather the storm. It may be difficult, but it won't be impossible, and you will get through it. So I would say with this card, this one coming up, this is a good time to just assess your current relationships, right? Like, are the people in your life, are they supporting you or are they not, right? We all have those couple people that might be nice to us 1 second, then the next second they switch up, right? So what this week is just something for you guys to keep an eye on. So keep an eye on your close relationships, right? So these first two cards, we got getting back to like traditions and things that, like bring you spiritual fulfillment. And part of that is, examining your relationships. Are your relationships giving you what you need? Right. And that's a real question we got to always give ourselves time to check in and answer for. Right. And the last one we got the King of Cups. So as you guys can see, there's the king, and then he's sitting on his throne. And cups is the opposite of sword energy. Sword energy is all about fire. Cups is all about emotion. So here we go with the King of Cups. Good advice, creativity, wisdom. The King of Cups represents maturity, creative thinking, and wisdom. You might think this card has a strong masculine energy, but it has a lot to do with emotions as well. When this card comes up in a reading, it speaks of compassion and kindness. The king is strong and powerful, but he is aware of his feelings and the feelings of those around him. He denotes growing into a more responsible person. You are entering an area where you will be more aware of how your actions affect those around you. If you realize that you have careless habits that are hurting other people, you may have a few changes to implement so that you become a better version of yourself. Trust the process and know that when it's all said and done, it will be well worth it. So I would say with this card, we're starting to become more aware of how our emotions and the things we say and the things we do impact others around us, right? So that's something for you guys to really think about. So I think overall what this week is going to be, it's going to be a week that's going to help raise our own self-awareness, right? So between going back to some traditions, right, or connecting with some spiritual practices that I would say, like help fulfill you spiritually, to then also, questioning and being aware of, okay, are there people around me? Are there people bad mouthing me? Are there people, judging me, right? Because you want to be around people that give you that fulfillment, right? That are not fake, that are also real and genuine, right? So that's what that card is saying. And then the King of Cups is also an awareness that we are humans and we exchange energy with each other, right? And it's important for us to realize how our own actions and the things we say and do also impact other people, right? So those are the three cards. So I would say overall, very big on building our own sense of awareness. But thank you guys for a wonderful discussion. Thank you guys for an awesome tarot reading as well. And also thank you guys for just listening and vibing out with me as I talk about some of my stories with abandonment, the things I've learned, the things I've lost, and hopefully you guys learn something too about it. Like we're not alone in this. And part of me being honest is also, I want other people to be honest too. Like that's one of the nice things I love about this podcast and stuff. So if you guys are liking it, definitely hit that subscribe button. Definitely would mean a lot to me. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your weekend. I hope you guys enjoyed this live stream. I will be back next week, so just expect live streams every Sunday at around 11 o'clock. That's definitely going to be a time I can hit consistently. And yeah, so I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend. Stay safe. Good luck this week. Build that self-awareness, everybody. And this is Josh officially signing off.